If there's one word of appreciation that you would like to hear, that I would like to hear, any of us from Jesus, what would it be? That you're a holy person or you're a humble person? We don't like to hear that, certainly. But I was thinking of what Jesus said in John chapter 1 to someone who was not converted. Once he commended a Roman centurion, I've not found faith in anyone like I've seen in him. Jesus said we read that in Matthew chapter 8. And that was an unconverted heathen who was probably worshiping idols, a Roman centurion. And amazing that the Lord could say that about him. God does not see as man sees. Sometimes we look at someone and says, boy, that chap doesn't really know the Lord much. And yet the Lord may see some quality in him, like the Lord saw in a Roman centurion. I've not found faith like him in anyone in Israel. Amazing words in Matthew 8. And here's another one I thought of, which is also very significant. I would certainly want the Lord to say that about me. John chapter 1 and Nathanael in verse 47, a commendation coming from Jesus. Remember, what a fantastic thing for Jesus to give a commendation to someone. I think of how the Father gave a commendation to Jesus. This is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased. Like that Jesus gave to the Roman centurion, and he told Nathanael, there, John 1:47, there is an Israelite in whom there is no guile, no deceit, zero hypocrisy. Lord, can you say that about me? There is zero hypocrisy, zero pretense. And remember, this guy was not even converted. He was an unconverted Jew. And not only that, he was an unconverted Jew who had strong prejudices against certain people. Because he says in verse 46, John 1:46, can any good thing come out of Nazareth? When Philip told Nathanael, Jesus of Nazareth is come here, he's the one the prophet spoke about. And Nathanael's response is, can any good thing come out of Nazareth? We know that type of prejudice is there among people in the world. Many in America, for example, despise African Americans, Black people. And many in India despise white people because they've been so disappointed with all the missionaries that have come there and saying they're all just proud people who think too much of themselves. And then there are people who despise different groups. There are people who despise the Chinese. There are people who despise anyone from Africa and say they're all uncultured and uneducated. So Nathanael is not special. And if you look into your own mind, you may find sometimes you may not express it like Nathanael did, but there can be that type of despising of someone. Can any good thing come from that group of people? Yeah, it's good for all of us to recognize that we are sinners saved by grace. The best among us is a sinner saved by grace. I see the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 15. He says, I'm the least of all the apostles. And yet, I think he accomplished more than any other apostle, but he thinks of himself, his own opinion is, I'm the least of all the apostles. And 5 years later, he writes Ephesians. And there he says in Ephesians chapter 3, I'm the least of all the believers, all the saints. And then 5 years later, he writes 1 Timothy, and he says, I'm the chief of sinners. See, Paul's progression of his opinion of himself was up there, least of the apostles, least of the saints, and chief of all the sinners. I mean, he wasn't being artificially humble. we can say I'm a sinner saved by grace in a light sort of way, because that's a spiritual thing to say. But it's quite another thing to recognize that when we are alone before the Lord, I'm just a sinner saved by grace. So it's amazing that Jesus could look at this man who had such a prejudice against anyone who comes from Nazareth. I don't know, maybe Nazareth had a bad reputation. There are certain places which have a bad reputation. Paul writes in one of his letters about those who come from Crete having a bad reputation. There are places that have a bad reputation. And I don't know what Nazareth, quite likely, Nazareth has a bad reputation, and that's why God sent his son to that town, so that he could send a town with a very bad reputation and show that you could live a holy life even there. So anyway, when Nathanael had this despising attitude towards other people, for Jesus to say about such a man, there is a man in whom there is no guile, no deceit, no hypocrisy. I mean, he may have had a despising attitude towards others, which was wrong, which he would correct later on. But there was no pretense. He was honest. He was pretended. He didn't pretend, really. And when Jesus spoke to him and told him, I saw you under the fig tree, he suddenly realized that this is the Son of God who could see him everywhere, could see people everywhere. And then he immediately changed his mind. Immediately. Rabbi. Immediately Jesus became his master. You're the Son of God. You're the King of Israel. See, that's the mark of a man without deceit. He's willing to change his mind in a moment when God convinces him. And that's how we must be. Lord, there are a lot of wrong things in all of us. And help us to see people as you see them. And when you show us a prejudice against somebody or some group of people, that we will get rid of it immediately and change our mind so that we can be more like Jesus. And then when we respond like that, it's amazing what the Lord will do for us even more. He says, you will see greater things. John 1, verse 50. You will see greater things than these. Once you get onto this path of total honesty and humility to change your mind in a moment when you see you were wrong. That's what the other thing we see in Nathanael. First of all, he's without deceit, Jesus said in John 1:47. And then he's willing to change his mind, this strong opinion he had all his life against the people in Nazareth. Like we've had strong opinions about certain group of people or certain individual. Even in the church, you could have an opinion about somebody which, rightly or wrongly, we have formed. And to be willing to change that in a moment when you see you were wrong. You were wrong about that person. That opinion you had was wrong. You see something in that person which says, boy, I didn't realize he was like that. That there was a genuineness about him or sincerity about him, which you say, I never saw it. I've had to change my mind about people many, many times. The human grace is such we so quickly form opinions, even about people in the church. We don't say it because, that's bad testimony. Say, Lord, have mercy on us. Help us to walk in humility. I'm not saying we should not have opinions. I believe that to be without discernment, we'll be fooled and deceived. And especially if you're elders, we have to have opinions about almost everybody in the church. Otherwise, you can't be leaders. Just like your children. If you find that a child has a particular weakness, you're not going to help him if you're blind to it or pretend that he doesn't have it. You see a particular weakness in a child about telling lies or exalting himself, you've got to recognize it and help him to be free from it. So I'm not saying we should be without discernment. There's a balance here. But discernment is different from prejudice. Prejudice is a preconceived opinion. I have this opinion of this person or this group of people. I have to die. And you see, when I see evidence of something which is bad, I got to open my eyes and say, yeah, that's bad. So that type of, if a person is consistent in a certain type of behavior, I do have an opinion about him. But in the case of Nathaniel, his mistake was to categorize of everybody in Nazareth is corrupt. Nothing good can come out of anybody who was born in Nazareth. That's what I mean. I'm not, but the fact that he was humble enough, he was humble, shows that he changed his mind from that bottom less level at which he was looking at people in Nazareth to go right up the one extreme to the other extreme. You're the Son of God who've come out of Nazareth. So I see a sincerity there of a willingness to change his mind immediately as soon as he saw he was wrong. I say, Lord, make us like that, to be willing to see where we are wrong about somebody or a group of people or a particular situation or our opinion about certain events. Say, Lord, as soon as I see it's wrong, to change my mind and to always acknowledge that I could be wrong. Always have that attitude, Lord, my assessment could be wrong. You may be right, and we shouldn't change our mind if we are not convinced. So please remember, I'm not saying we should be without discernment, because without discernment, you'll never grow spiritually, and you'll be deceived left, right, and center by people. So we must be discernment, especially if you're an elder. You have a tremendous amount of discernment, but discernment with humility and with a willingness to let God change our mind about a situation or about a group of people or a circumstance or anything. Because that is to humbly acknowledge we have not become like Christ. We want to be like him. We want to be perfect. So let us press on to perfection. I believe if you meditate on this, I mean, you could go into a whole sermon on this, but if you meditate on this, I believe God himself will show us where we have to develop further. And I certainly see my own need in that, because as an elder, I have to have opinions about many people, but I also have to change my opinions often. And I must be willing for that and not be stubborn. May the Lord help us all. Amen.